a rancher lived alone for years, until 10 Apache women sought refuge on his ranch. The rancher had lived alone for so long that the land and the sky felt like his only true companions. Every morning, long before the sun rose, he would step out of the small wooden house he called home and take in the quiet beauty of his ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of earth and grass, and the distant mountains stood tall, silent witnesses to his solitary life. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard work, and his face, weathered by wind and sun, carried the lines of a man who had learned to rely only on himself. He had not always lived this way. When he was younger, he had a family, and the house had once been full of laughter and voices. But time had a way of changing everything. One by one, the people he cared for had left, and slowly, the ranch became a place of solitude. At first, the loneliness had been painful. Nights were long and quiet, with only the creaking of the old house and the whisper of the wind through the trees. He would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking about the life he had lost, the dreams that had not come true, and the connections that had faded away. Over time, however, he grew accustomed to his own company. He learned to enjoy the rhythm of ranch life, the steady work that kept him busy from dawn to dusk. The cattle needed tending, the fences needed repairing, and the land demanded attention. Every day had a purpose, even if no one was there to witness it. The rancher's days followed a routine he had perfected over the years. He would start before sunrise, feeding the horses and checking the fences along the sprawling fields. The ranch was large, stretching across hills and valleys, with rivers and streams that cut through the land like silver threads. Each animal had a name, a personality, and a place in his heart. He would talk to them as he worked, not out of madness but out of the simple human need for connection. "Morning, Daisy," he would say to a cow, or "Easy there, Buck," to a horse, his voice carrying across the fields. The animals responded in their own way, their quiet companionship offering a comfort that words alone could not provide. Afternoons were spent on the more demanding tasks. He repaired fences that had been damaged by storms, tended to the crops he grew for feed, and maintained the old barn that had stood for decades. His hands moved skillfully, performing tasks he had done 1,000 times before, yet each time he felt a quiet satisfaction in a job well done. Sometimes he would pause to watch the clouds drift across the sky, feeling a sense of freedom that only the vast open land could offer. The ranch was not just a place to live. It was a world he had built with his own hands, a sanctuary where he could escape from the complications of society and live according to his own rules. Evenings were the loneliest part of the day. The sun would sink behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the fields, and the ranch would fall into a hush. He would light a fire in the old stone fireplace and sit in his favorite chair, listening to the crackle of the flames. Sometimes he read books he had collected over the years, dusty volumes filled with stories of adventure and history. Other times, he simply sat in silence, letting his thoughts wander. Memories of his past would come and go like the wind, sometimes comforting, sometimes painful. He remembered the laughter of family dinners, the voices of friends, and the warmth of human presence. Those memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what he had lost and what he had come to accept. Despite the solitude, the rancher had found a kind of peace in his life. He had learned to enjoy the small things, the taste of fresh bread he baked himself, the sound of a stream flowing nearby, or the sight of a hawk gliding in the sky. He had grown strong and self-reliant, capable of handling any challenge the land could throw at him. The neighbors in the nearby town saw him as a quiet, reliable man, though few had ever spent much time with him. They respected his independence, sometimes envying the freedom he had chosen for himself, even if they could not understand the loneliness that came with it. On some nights, he would walk the fields under a sky full of stars, feeling a connection to something larger than himself. The universe seemed vast and endless, and he felt both small and significant at the same time. There was a rhythm to the world that he could feel in his bones, a sense that life went on regardless of human presence. He felt gratitude for this life, even if it was a solitary one, because it was honest and real. Every sunrise and sunset marked another day of survival, another day of independence, and he cherished each one in his own quiet way. The rancher's solitude was not without its challenges. Harsh winters brought snowstorms that cut off the land from the outside world, forcing him to rely on his own skills and preparation. Summers could be unforgiving, with scorching heat and parched earth that tested both man and livestock. He had learned to read the weather in the sky, to anticipate the movements of animals, and to adapt to the changing seasons. His life was demanding, but it was also deeply fulfilling. He knew every inch of the land, every hidden trail, and every secret corner of his ranch. The place was a part of him, and he a part of it, in a way that few outsiders could ever understand. Even in his isolation, he maintained a sense of routine and discipline. He kept journals where he wrote down observations about the land, the animals, and his own thoughts. He sometimes carved small pieces of wood, creating tools or decorations that were both practical and beautiful. These activities kept his mind sharp and his hands busy, a way of channeling energy that might otherwise have been wasted on loneliness or regret. Each day ended with a sense of accomplishment, no matter how small, and that was enough to carry him through to the next. Yet, despite the satisfaction he found in work and nature, there remained a quiet longing in his heart. He sometimes wondered what it would be like to share his life with others, to hear laughter echo across the fields, or to have someone to sit by the fire and talk with in the evenings. But these thoughts were fleeting. He had learned to keep them at bay, to focus on the present and the life he had built for himself. It was a life of simplicity, but also of freedom, and he would not trade it for anything. As the seasons changed, the rancher moved through the familiar rhythm of life. Spring brought new growth and fresh hope. Summer tested endurance under the blazing sun. Autumn painted the land in warm colors, and winter demanded resilience against cold and snow. Each season brought its own lessons, its own challenges, and its own beauty. And through it all, he remained steadfast, a solitary figure on a vast landscape, living a life shaped by his own hands and choices. In the distance, the mountains stood as silent guardians, and the rivers wound their way through the valleys like threads of silver. The rancher felt a connection to the land that went beyond mere survival. It was as if the earth itself acknowledged his presence, offering solace, challenge, and companionship in its own quiet way. He was alone, yet not lonely, because the land and the animals provided a constant presence, a reminder that life continued, even without human company. For the rancher, this life of solitude had become normal, even comforting. He knew the value of self-reliance, the importance of routine, and the beauty of simplicity. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there was an unspoken hope, a small spark of curiosity about what the future might hold. He did not know that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined, that the quiet ranch would soon be filled with new voices, new stories, and new connections. But for now, he was content to live in the moment, to tend his land, care for his animals, and walk under the endless sky, feeling both the weight of solitude and the quiet peace it brought. One late afternoon, as the rancher was inspecting the fences near the western pasture, he noticed movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was a group of deer or perhaps some stray horses wandering near his land. But as he squinted against the fading sunlight, he realized the figures were moving with purpose. People. A group of 10 women was approaching, their horses tired and covered in dust. The rancher froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had lived alone for so long that the sight of humans coming to his property felt startling, almost unreal. He watched carefully as they reached the edge of the ranch. The women dismounted, their faces showing exhaustion, worry, and a quiet strength that told him they had traveled a long distance. They were Apache, he realized, from the way they carried themselves and the small details in their clothing and belongings. Something had driven them from their home, something serious enough to make them seek refuge in a place they had never known. The rancher felt a mixture of emotions: caution, curiosity, and a deep, unexpected sense of responsibility. The leader of the group, a tall woman with dark, determined eyes, stepped forward and called out politely but firmly, "Sir, we are seeking shelter. We have traveled far and have nowhere else to go. Please, may we stay here for a while?" Her voice was steady, yet there was an undercurrent of fatigue that made her words carry weight. The rancher hesitated. He was a man used to solitude, a man who had learned to rely only on himself. Letting strangers, even in desperate need, into his home was something he had never considered. Yet he could see the honesty in their eyes, the truth in their request. He cleared his throat and replied cautiously, "You can stay for a short time. But I must warn you, life here is hard, and you will need to help with the work." The women nodded respectfully, understanding the offer and the unspoken conditions. They began to move their belongings onto the ranch slowly, setting up temporary spaces near the barn. The rancher watched them work, impressed by their resilience. Despite their obvious exhaustion, they moved with grace and purpose, showing that they were not helpless or weak, but survivors accustomed to hardship. The first evening was quiet, filled with the sounds of animals settling and the wind rustling through the trees. The rancher prepared a simple meal of stew and bread for everyone. At first, the women ate in silence, tired from their journey and uncertain of their new surroundings. The rancher kept to himself mostly, sitting at the edge of the table observing them. But as the meal went on, small conversations began. One woman asked about the ranch, another about the animals. Slowly, a tentative connection formed, fragile but present. Over the next few days, the rancher began to learn more about the women's story. They spoke carefully, not sharing everything at once, but enough to understand their situation. There had been troubles in their community, conflicts, scarcity, and the kind of danger that forced people to leave their homes. These women had chosen to trust him, a stranger in the hope of safety. The rancher listened, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and empathy. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten the weight of human struggle, the courage it took to leave everything behind and step into uncertainty. The women adapted quickly to the routines of ranch life. They learned how to feed the animals, gather firewood, and carry water from the stream. Some had skills the rancher had never thought of: knowledge of herbs, simple remedies for minor injuries, and ways to make the land yield more with careful care. He began to see them not just as guests, but as valuable companions, each bringing something unique to the ranch. Yet there was still a delicate balance. Trust had to be earned, not given freely. And the rancher, though willing to help, remained cautious, aware that this sudden change could disrupt the life he had built for himself. Despite the initial tension, small moments of warmth and humor began to appear. One morning, a young woman accidentally spilled water on the floor while filling a bucket, and the rancher, instead of scolding her, simply laughed and helped her clean it up. Later, when a cow wandered away, two women worked together with the rancher to gently guide it back, laughing at the stubbornness of the animal. These shared experiences, though simple, built a foundation of trust and camaraderie. The rancher realized that life could be different from what he had known, filled not just with routine and work, but with connection and shared effort. The women also taught him lessons of their own. One evening, they sat around the fire and shared stories of Apache traditions, stories of courage, survival, and community. The rancher listened intently, fascinated by the richness of their culture and the wisdom woven into their experiences. It was unlike anything he had learned from books or neighbors. The stories reminded him that life was not only about solitude or survival, but also about understanding others, sharing knowledge, and creating bonds that could last through hardship. As days turned into weeks, the rancher noticed changes within himself. He had lived decades in solitude, believing he needed no one. Yet now, seeing the women care for the animals, work together, and support each other, he felt a growing sense of connection he had long thought impossible. He began to appreciate the small acts of kindness they showed, offering a meal, helping repair a fence, or simply sharing a smile. Life, he realized, could be richer and more fulfilling when shared. There were challenges, of course. Differences in habits, expectations, and ways of doing things sometimes caused misunderstandings. The rancher was used to absolute control over his routines, while the women brought their own ideas and methods. A minor argument over how to store the hay or feed the animals reminded him that living with others required compromise. But slowly, they learned to navigate these differences with patience and respect. They realized that survival was easier when they worked as a team, and the rancher began to see the value of openness and flexibility. The first winter with the women was particularly challenging. Cold winds swept across the plains, snow covered the fields, and the ranch demanded even more work. Yet together, they managed. They built extra shelters, ensured the animals had sufficient feed, and kept the fire burning long into the night. The rancher, who had always managed alone, felt a surprising comfort in the shared effort. The cold evenings were no longer quiet and lonely, but filled with conversation, laughter, and the quiet warmth of companionship. During this time, bonds deepened in ways the rancher had never imagined. The leader of the women, the one who had first spoken to him, became a trusted confidant. They shared their thoughts on the land, animals, and life. She taught him how to see things differently, how to listen not just with his ears but with his heart. The younger women learned from him as well, gaining skills in ranching that would help them survive wherever they went. It became clear that this unexpected meeting was not just a chance event, it was a turning point in all of their lives. By the end of the first year, the rancher's world had changed completely. The land remained the same, the animals still roamed the fields, and the mountains stood silent in the distance, but his life had taken on a new rhythm. The ranch was no longer a place of solitude, it was alive with activity, voices, and shared purpose. The women had brought energy, wisdom, and life to a place that had been quiet for too long, and in return, he had offered them shelter, safety, and guidance, forming bonds that would last for years to come. The rancher often reflected on how quickly life could change. Just months ago, he had been alone, content in his routines, believing that solitude was all he needed. Now he had companions, teachers, and friends. The women had taught him that courage could come in many forms: the courage to leave home, the courage to trust a stranger, and the courage to embrace life, even in the face of uncertainty. And he had learned, perhaps for the first time in his life, that accepting help and sharing your life with others could be a source of strength, not weakness. Evenings now were filled with warmth and stories. The fire burned brighter, laughter echoed through the house, and the rancher felt a deep sense of peace he had never known before. He had learned that life was not meant to be endured alone, but lived with others, sharing joys and burdens alike. And as he looked at the women around him, tired but smiling, he understood that this unexpected arrival had brought a gift greater than he could have imagined. A gift of connection, trust, and the beginnings of a new family. As the days passed, the rancher and the 10 Apache women settled into a rhythm that was both new and surprisingly natural. What had once been a solitary ranch now hummed with quiet activity. Early mornings were filled with the sound of hooves against dirt, the low murmur of voices as they worked together, and the occasional laughter that startled the rancher at first, but soon became a welcome sound. Slowly, the boundaries of caution and formality began to fade, replaced by trust, understanding, and mutual respect. The rancher took the lead in teaching the women about ranch life, but he quickly realized that their knowledge of survival, nature, and resourcefulness was remarkable. He taught them how to mend fences, care for the livestock, and manage the fields, explaining each task with patience. They absorbed his lessons eagerly, asking questions, offering suggestions, and sometimes challenging him in ways that made him think differently. In return, they shared their own skills and knowledge. One woman showed him how to identify edible plants along the riverbank. Another shared remedies for minor cuts and bruises using herbs she carried from her home. He was impressed by their practical intelligence and adaptability, understanding that he had something to learn from them as much as they had to learn from him. At first, the rancher kept a careful distance, wary of forming attachments too quickly. He had spent years alone and feared the vulnerability that came with trusting others, but the women were patient. They respected his space while gradually involving themselves in his daily routines. They helped with chores without being asked, anticipated needs he hadn't even voiced, and offered small kindnesses. A hot cup of tea after a long day, a freshly baked loaf of bread, or a soft blanket on cold nights. These gestures, simple though they were, slowly chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. One particular afternoon marked a turning point. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, with heavy rain and strong winds that threatened to sweep across the fields. The rancher was checking the fences when he realized that a section of the corral had been weakened by the weather. Without hesitation, he began working to secure it, but he quickly noticed the women rushing to help him. Together they lifted, tied, and reinforced the structure, each movement coordinated despite the chaos of the storm. Mud splashed under their boots, hair plastered to their faces, and rain soaked them to the bone, but they worked as one unit. When the task was done, the rancher felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a deep sense of belonging and pride in what they had accomplished together. Evenings became a time for sharing stories. Around the fire, the women recounted tales from their lives, their journeys, and their heritage. The rancher listened, captivated by their experiences, and sometimes shared his own past, though he spoke sparingly. They talked about dreams, fears, and memories of home, finding common ground in the universal experiences of struggle and hope. These conversations created a bridge between them, transforming the ranch from a place of shelter into a home filled with understanding and empathy. Challenges were inevitable. Differences in habits and perspectives occasionally led to tension. The rancher, used to doing things a certain way, sometimes struggled to accept the women's alternative methods. At other times, the women grew frustrated when tasks did not go smoothly, or when his pride made him reluctant to accept help. Yet, each disagreement was met with patience and compromise. They learned to communicate openly, listening to one another with respect, and slowly, these challenges strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. Daily life on the ranch became a blend of work and learning. The rancher taught the women to care for the cattle, how to read their behavior, recognize signs of illness, and guide them through the fields. In return, the women taught him to forage for wild herbs, preserve food for the long winters, and approach problems with creativity rather than force. They taught him small lessons in patience, adaptability, and resilience, showing that survival was not just about strength, but about intelligence, foresight, and cooperation. He marveled at how much wisdom they carried, often hidden beneath their quiet demeanor. Over time, the rancher observed subtle changes in the dynamics of the household. Tasks that once felt like chores became opportunities for connection. The women prepared meals together, sometimes inviting him to participate, and the act of sharing food became a ritual of community. They celebrated small victories, repairing a broken fence, successfully moving the herd, or harvesting crops from the field. Laughter became more frequent, and the rancher found himself smiling without reason, feeling the joy that had long been absent from his life. The women also introduced traditions and practices from their Apache heritage. They would gather in the evenings to tell stories of their ancestors, sing songs, or perform simple rituals that honored nature and family. The rancher watched with interest, sometimes joining in when he felt comfortable. He learned to appreciate the depth of their culture, recognizing that the wisdom of the past could coexist with the practical demands of ranch life. The women's stories gave him a new perspective on resilience, community, and the importance of preserving one's identity, even in unfamiliar circumstances. During one particularly harsh winter, when snow blanketed the fields and the wind howled through the trees, the women's presence proved invaluable. They worked together to ensure that the animals were fed and sheltered, that the house remained warm, and that no one went hungry. The rancher marveled at their endurance, strength, and ingenuity. They had transformed the ranch from a place of solitary survival into a functioning, cooperative household. The shared effort during those difficult days cemented their relationships, creating bonds that went beyond mere necessity. The rancher began to reflect on his own transformation. He realized that his previous life of solitude, while comforting in its familiarity, had limited him in ways he had never acknowledged. Living with the women had taught him patience, empathy, and the joy of shared labor. It had reminded him of the value of trust and companionship. He saw that life could be richer and more meaningful when experienced together, with mutual respect and shared effort. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence along the eastern pasture, one of the younger women asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever wish you had more people in your life before we came?" she asked. He paused, reflecting. For a long moment he considered the years of solitude, the quiet nights, and the steady work. Then he nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I also know that life brings people at the right time. I may not have been ready before, but now it feels right." The women smiled, understanding the unspoken truth in his words. They too had faced uncertainty and hardship, yet they had found this place and each other at just the right moment. As the seasons changed, the ranch became a tapestry of life, woven with shared labor, laughter, and learning. The women worked alongside the rancher in the fields, in the barns, and in the kitchen, each contributing in their own way. The rancher noticed that the land itself seemed more alive, vibrant, and cared for. Crops flourished, animals were healthier, and even the house seemed warmer, filled with voices and presence. The transformation was not just in the ranch, but in the people who lived there, including the rancher himself. Gradually, the rancher began to let go of the fears and reservations that had defined his solitary life. He allowed himself to rely on the women, to accept help, and to share responsibilities. He recognized that leadership was not about control, but about guidance, cooperation, and mutual respect. The women, in turn, learned to trust his knowledge, patience, and judgment. Together, they created a balance that allowed everyone to thrive. The bond they formed went beyond practicality. There were moments of quiet reflection, shared joy, and even playful teasing that softened the edges of their daily routines. The rancher, who had once believed that solitude was his only path to peace, discovered that companionship could bring a deeper sense of fulfillment. He felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected arrival of these women, who had not only found shelter but had also brought new life, energy, and purpose to his world. Evenings around the fire became sacred moments. They would cook together, tell stories, and sometimes sit in comfortable silence, listening to the crackle of the flames and the wind outside. The rancher found himself opening up in ways he had not for decades, sharing memories, thoughts, and hopes for the future. The women listened, offering empathy, insight, and encouragement. It was a dialogue of trust and connection, built slowly but firmly, layer by layer, through shared experiences and mutual respect. Through these months, the rancher understood that life was not simply about survival, but about community, trust, and care. The women had brought not only their skills and knowledge, but also their hearts and spirits, teaching him that strength could be found in unity, and that vulnerability could coexist with resilience. He realized that the quiet ranch he had once cherished for its solitude had become a place of growth, learning, and unexpected joy. By the end of this period, the rancher no longer saw the women as temporary guests. They had become an integral part of his life, his routines, and his heart. The ranch was no longer merely his, it was theirs, a shared space of work, learning, and laughter. Together, they had created a household that thrived on trust, cooperation, and respect. And the rancher, once a solitary figure, began to imagine a future where this community, this unexpected family, would continue to grow and flourish. Over time, the rancher began to notice changes in his land, his home, and even himself that he had never imagined. What had once been a quiet, solitary ranch was now full of life, energy, and activity. The presence of the 10 Apache women had transformed every corner of the property. The fields seemed greener, the barns better organized, and even the animals appeared healthier, calmer, and more responsive. The rancher realized that this transformation was not only in the physical space, but also in the spirit of the place. Life was returning to the ranch in a way it had not known for years, and he felt a quiet pride in the change. The women had brought new skills and knowledge that complemented the rancher's own. Some taught him how to plant and nurture a variety of crops he had never tried before. They showed him how to rotate fields, care for soil, and grow plants that were both useful and beautiful. Others introduced small innovations in animal care, helping the cattle and horses thrive with less stress and more attention. The rancher observed that even small details made a difference. The way the chickens were housed, the method of feeding the horses, and the way water was stored during dry spells. It was a revelation that even a place he thought he knew completely could grow and improve when approached with care and wisdom. Inside the house, changes were just as remarkable. The women organized the rooms, cleaned, and decorated in subtle ways that made the space feel warm and welcoming. The rancher, who had once lived in a simple, sparse environment, now found comfort in the little touches they added. Fresh flowers on the windowsills, neatly stacked firewood, and home-cooked meals brought a sense of home he had not felt in decades. The women also introduced traditions and practices from their culture, small ceremonies and celebrations that honored the land, the animals, and each other. These moments became important milestones, bringing the rancher and the women closer together in ways that words alone could not express. The animals responded to the change as well. The cattle, horses, and smaller creatures seemed calmer and more cooperative, reflecting the care and attention given to them by the women. They helped with feeding, grooming, and observing the animals' health, catching small issues before they became problems. The rancher began to understand that the well-being of his animals was not just his responsibility. It was a shared responsibility, and that shared effort made everything easier and more effective. For the first time, he realized that his ranch could operate not just because of his hard work, but because of teamwork, patience, and mutual care. Daily routines became more flexible and creative. The women suggested new ways to approach work on the ranch, rotating responsibilities, planning meals and chores more efficiently, and even creating small projects to improve the land. The rancher, who had long relied on his own methods, found himself listening and adapting. It was humbling but also liberating to see that progress could be made when more minds worked together. He began to encourage ideas and celebrate successes, recognizing that leadership was not about doing everything himself, but about guiding, supporting, and learning from others. One morning, the rancher walked through the fields and noticed the garden had flourished beyond his expectations. The women had planted a variety of vegetables and herbs, each carefully nurtured, creating a vibrant tapestry of color and life. They had even built small pathways, making it easier to move through the rows and care for the plants. He marveled at how the garden, like the ranch itself, had grown stronger and more beautiful through collaboration. It was a clear sign that this partnership was not just about survival, but about thriving, creating something meaningful together. The women also brought music, art, and stories that filled the ranch with a richness it had never known. Evenings often became times of celebration. Sometimes they sang around the fire, sharing songs from their heritage. Other times they would gather in a circle and tell stories, passing wisdom, humor, and hope from one person to another. The rancher, who had rarely shared such moments with anyone, found himself participating, laughing, learning, and feeling the joy of being part of a community. These moments strengthened bonds and gave everyone a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. Their influence extended beyond the ranch itself. The women began teaching the rancher small skills that improved his life in ways he had never considered. They showed him how to prepare natural remedies, preserve food for the winter, and use resources efficiently. They introduced techniques for cleaning, organizing, and maintaining tools and supplies, making daily life smoother and more enjoyable. Each lesson was accompanied by patience and encouragement, and the rancher absorbed these teachings with gratitude and curiosity. He realized that their presence had not only changed the ranch, but also transformed his own understanding of what life could be. Socially, the rancher began to see the value of connection in a new light. He had long avoided the nearby town, finding interactions with others unnecessary or bothersome. But with the women's encouragement, he ventured into the community to gather supplies, attend small gatherings, and even share news of the ranch. The women's openness and courage inspired him to be more outgoing, to trust people more, and to recognize that life could be richer when experienced beyond the boundaries of his property. Slowly, the rancher became known not just as a solitary figure, but as someone part of a community, a man who could balance independence with connection. The rancher also observed the women supporting each other in ways that taught him about resilience and compassion. When one woman was tired or injured, the others stepped in without hesitation. When challenges arose, broken tools, sudden weather changes, or minor accidents, they faced them together, problem-solving calmly and efficiently. The rancher realized that strength was not only in physical labor, but in the ability to trust, communicate, and work as a team. This realization deepened his respect and admiration for the women, and it inspired him to become a more patient, understanding, and compassionate person. As the months went by, the rancher noticed changes within himself. He felt more energized, more hopeful, and more connected to the world around him. He discovered that caring for others, sharing responsibilities, and participating in a community could bring happiness and satisfaction he had never known in solitude. The ranch, once a place of quiet survival, had become a center of life, creativity, and growth. He was no longer just a caretaker of land and animals. He was a participant in a living, breathing family. Even small moments were filled with significance. A shared meal, a successful repair of a fence, or an evening spent talking by the fire became celebrations of life itself. The rancher took pleasure in these simple joys, recognizing that the women had taught him to appreciate what he had long taken for granted. They had reminded him that life was not just about routine or labor, but about shared experiences, connection, and the quiet beauty of everyday moments. The ranch itself flourished under this new energy. Fields that had been neglected or minimally cared for now bore fruits and vegetables in abundance. Animal health improved, and even the weather seemed less harsh with the team working together to prepare and respond. The rancher observed the physical transformation with pride, but valued even more the intangible changes, the laughter, the trust, the sense of safety and purpose that filled every corner. This was a home in every sense of the word, not just a place to live. By the end of the year, it was clear that the ranch had been forever changed. It was no longer a symbol of solitude but of community, resilience, and growth. The rancher, who had spent decades in isolation, now understood the value of companionship, shared effort, and mutual respect. He had learned that life could be richer and more meaningful when people came together, each contributing their strengths, skills, and hearts. The women had not only found refuge, but had also brought life, joy, and hope to a place that had long been quiet and lonely. The rancher often reflected on how much his world had expanded in such a short time. What had begun as a reluctant act of kindness had grown into a deep, lasting bond. The women had transformed the ranch, but they had also transformed him. He had learned to trust, to share, to appreciate, and to celebrate life in ways he had never imagined. And as he stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun sink behind the mountains and the women tending to the animals with care and laughter, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and fulfillment. In the quiet moments, he understood that this transformation was about more than just the ranch. It was about relationships, trust, and the courage to embrace change. The women had brought skills, knowledge, culture, and heart, but more importantly, they had brought life itself into a place that had once been lonely and still. Together, they had built a home, a community, and a future that promised hope, growth, and joy for everyone involved. Time had a way of moving differently on the ranch once the women had settled in. Days were no longer measured only by work or routine, but by shared moments, laughter, and small celebrations that made life feel richer and fuller. The rancher had grown used to the sound of voices around him, the presence of hands ready to help, and the energy that each woman brought to the home. What had started as temporary refuge had grown into something far more enduring, a family built not by blood but by trust, respect, and love. The women themselves had grown comfortable in their new home. The ranch, which had once been a solitary expanse of land, had become a place where they could rebuild their lives, find safety, and exercise their skills. Each of them contributed in ways that reflected their personalities and strengths. Some took charge of the kitchen and meals, creating dishes that nourished both body and spirit. Others spent long hours in the barns, caring for the animals with precision and kindness. A few worked in the fields, planting crops and tending to gardens that had become colorful and abundant under their care. The rancher watched them with admiration, marveling at their resilience, skill, and teamwork. One of the most remarkable changes was the way everyone had learned to depend on each other. The rancher, who had once done everything alone, now realized the strength of shared responsibility. Tasks that once seemed overwhelming were now manageable and even enjoyable when divided among them. They celebrated small successes together, mending fences, moving the herd, or harvesting the first vegetables of the season. Each accomplishment was not just practical but symbolic, a sign that together they were creating a life richer than what any of them could have built alone. Their evenings became times of connection, filled with storytelling, music, and quiet reflection. Around the fire, they would share tales of the past, recounting experiences that shaped who they were. The rancher listened attentively, often sharing his own memories, though he spoke with a humility that showed he had learned to value others' perspectives above his own pride. Through these moments, bonds deepened and trust became stronger. It was no longer about survival. It was about living fully, with purpose and care for one another. Even in times of challenge, the rancher and the women demonstrated courage and unity. One particularly harsh winter tested their resolve when snowstorms blocked the main roads and food supplies ran low. Yet, through careful planning, teamwork, and determination, they managed to sustain themselves. The women used their knowledge of the land and resources to ensure the animals remained fed, the house stayed warm, and each person had what they needed. The rancher realized that this shared resilience was far more powerful than any solitary strength he had ever relied on. Together, they could face anything. The transformation extended beyond practical skills and routines. The rancher began to see life through a new lens, appreciating the subtle joys that companionship brought. Mornings were filled with laughter as they worked, afternoons with conversation and learning, and evenings with warmth and reflection. He found himself smiling more often, feeling gratitude for the small gestures, the passing of a hot cup of tea, the gentle touch of a blanket, or a quiet word of encouragement. These moments, once foreign to his solitary life, had become essential to his happiness. The women also helped the rancher see the importance of nurturing not just the land and animals but relationships. They reminded him that life was about balance, between work and rest, solitude and companionship, giving and receiving. They encouraged him to engage with the community beyond the ranch, helping him rebuild connections he had long avoided. He began to venture into town for supplies, sharing news of the ranch and introducing the women to neighbors. Slowly, he became known not only as a capable rancher, but also as someone who valued collaboration, trust, and community. As time passed, the rancher noticed subtle but powerful changes in himself. He became more patient, more open to new ideas, and more willing to embrace life's uncertainties. He learned to celebrate not just his own successes, but those of the women and the community they were creating together. He realized that leadership was no longer about controlling everything, but about guiding, listening, and supporting. He had learned that strength lay not only in independence, but in the courage to rely on others and to share responsibilities willingly. One spring morning, the rancher and the women gathered in the garden, surrounded by rows of flourishing vegetables and herbs. The air was warm, the sky bright, and the animals grazed peacefully nearby. They had built something lasting together, a home, a community, and a sense of purpose that touched every part of the ranch. Standing there, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The ranch, which had once symbolized solitude and quiet endurance, had become a living, breathing testament to collaboration, resilience, and care. The women had also formed bonds among themselves, creating a network of support that strengthened the household. They shared responsibilities with grace and understanding, learning to anticipate each other's needs and support each other through challenges. The rancher watched this dynamic with admiration, recognizing the beauty of trust and interdependence. It was a model of life he had never experienced before, and it inspired him to continue growing alongside them. Small traditions and celebrations became an integral part of life on the ranch. Birthdays, harvests, and even minor accomplishments were marked with simple ceremonies that honored their achievements and their shared journey. Around the fire, they sang, told stories, and celebrated each other's courage, patience, and wisdom. The rancher, who had rarely participated in such rituals, found joy in these moments. He realized that these celebrations were not just for entertainment. They were expressions of gratitude, connection, and love. The rancher also reflected on the courage it had taken for the women to seek refuge on his property. They had left their home, faced uncertainty, and trusted a stranger to provide safety. Their bravery inspired him, and he often marveled at how much strength resided in their quiet actions. In return, he had offered them shelter, guidance, and stability, forming bonds that went beyond mere survival. They had become his family, not by blood but by choice, commitment, and shared experience. The animals, too, thrived under the care of everyone on the ranch. Horses, cattle, and smaller creatures responded to consistent attention, kindness, and routine. They became part of the extended family, reflecting the harmony and balance that had been cultivated in this once solitary place. The rancher observed that the health and happiness of the animals mirrored the well-being of the people, reinforcing the idea that care, patience, and respect could transform both land and life. Even the rancher's perspective on solitude had changed. He no longer feared the quiet moments or relied solely on himself. Instead, he embraced both companionship and reflection, understanding that true peace came from balance. He found comfort in shared silence, in the presence of others without the need for constant conversation or activity. The ranch, once a symbol of isolation, had become a sanctuary of connection, growth, and hope. By now, the rancher and the women had formed routines that balanced work, rest, and recreation. Days were structured yet flexible, allowing for spontaneity, creativity, and care. They learned from each other, celebrated successes, and supported one another through setbacks. Each person brought unique strengths to the household, creating a dynamic where everyone contributed and benefited. The rancher, who had once believed that life was best lived alone, discovered the joy, strength, and fulfillment that came from sharing life with others. As the sun set one evening, casting golden light across the fields, the rancher stood on the porch, watching the women tending to the animals and the garden. The scene was peaceful, vibrant, and full of life. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for their presence, their courage, and their willingness to trust him. This was more than a home. It was a living testament to resilience, connection, and the beauty of human kindness. He realized that the unexpected arrival of these women had not only changed his life, but had transformed the ranch into a place of hope, growth, and enduring joy. In quiet moments, the rancher reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as a temporary act of kindness had grown into a lasting family, bonded by trust, respect, and shared experience. They had built a life together, blending skills, knowledge, and hearts into something greater than the sum of its parts. And in doing so, they had shown him that life's greatest rewards often come from opening one's heart, embracing change, and finding strength in unity. The rancher now looked to the future with hope. The ranch was thriving, the women were strong and confident, and their bond had become unbreakable. He knew challenges would continue to arise, as they always would in life, but he also knew that together, they could face anything. The ranch had become a place of growth, joy, and love, a home in every sense of the word. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, he felt a quiet certainty that this unexpected family, brought together by courage and trust, would continue to flourish for many years to come. In the end, the rancher understood that life had a way of surprising those who are open to it. His once lonely existence had been transformed into a vibrant, meaningful journey. He had found companionship, learned the power of trust, and discovered that a home is not just a place but a community, a family, and a shared heart. And in that knowledge, he found peace, fulfillment, and a sense of purpose that would carry him through the rest of his days, surrounded by the women who had brought life, love, and hope to his ranch.